Yesterday, we started World War II by looking at dictatorships in Europe. Today, we're going to look at Section 2, Europe Goes to War. Now, in 1936, Hitler starts rebuilding the German military. It was a violation of the Versailles Treaty. Britain, France, and do nothing. Hitler sees this as weaknesses of the Allies. In 1938, the Nazis take over the Austrian government. This is known as the Anschluss. They merge with Germany. See, Hitler was Austrian, so he wanted to annex Austria to make it part of Germany, which would then make him a German. In 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland. This was a region of Czechoslovakia that borders Germany. Hitler claimed that 3 million Germans lived there, but had been taken away after the Versailles Treaty was signed. So he wanted them to come back and join with Germany. This could potentially start a war between Britain and France and Germany. Now we're going to cover the Munich Agreement. To avoid a war, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, and Italy met in Munich and worked out a deal. Britain and France were not prepared for a major war, so they would do anything to avoid it. Now, Hitler and Mussolini met with Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and Edouard Daladier, who was the Prime Minister of France. The President of Czechoslovakia was not even invited. Here we see the four of them. Chamberlain on the far left, French Prime Minister Daladier next to him, and then of course there's Hitler, and on the far right is Mussolini looking very happy. In fact, none of them really look very happy there, do they? The British and French leaders agreed to allow Germany to have the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise that Hitler would make no further demands. This is referred to as the policy of appeasement, given to demands to avoid a war. Chamberlain, when he returns to London, holding up the agreement, refers to it as peace in our time. Of course, the peace wouldn't last more than a year. 6 months later, in 1939, German troops march in and take over the rest of Czechoslovakia. Here we see the German troops marching down the main avenue in Prague. See the civilians, the woman on the right obviously visibly upset, though that woman on the left there looks real happy to see the Nazis marching down into Czechoslovakia. Britain and France promised to protect Poland if Germany ever invades. Now World War II begins. Hitler wants to invade Poland next. He wants land for the German people. He calls this Lebensraum, living space. But Hitler is concerned about Stalin and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is on Poland's eastern border, and he certainly doesn't want to get into a war with the Soviet Union yet. So in August of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union sign a treaty. The Soviets would not interfere with Germany. In fact, they would help them conquer Poland. And then after Poland is defeated, they would divide the country up between them. This was a political cartoon that appeared in the English-speaking papers. We see Hitler on the left and Stalin on the right. They're bowing and tipping their caps to each other, but they're insulting each other at the same time. And we see the dead body representing Poland lying between them. With this treaty now, you can see Poland is fairly isolated. They have Germany on their western border, northern border with East Prussia. They also have the Soviet Union, who have taken over the small Baltic nations of Lithuania and Latvia on their eastern border and to the north, so they're pretty much surrounded. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. World War II has begun. Here we see German troops goose-stepping, a form of marching the Germans like to do, through Warsaw. Britain and France do declare war on Germany 2 days later, but there really isn't anything militarily they can do to help Poland. About 12 days later, the Soviet Union invades Poland. As you can see, Poland will be divided between the two countries. Poland is surrounded and is forced to surrender. Warsaw, the capital of Poland, is heavily bombed by the German Air Force, causing thousands of civilian deaths. German Stuka dive bombers. These planes really weren't that great, but they were very scary. They had whistles built in the wings, so when they dove down on enemy populations and military formations, it formed a high-pitched sound that would be terrifying to the people below. This was a famous photo that appeared in Life magazine showing a young Polish boy sitting on what's left of his bombed-out house. The Germans have invented a new tactic called Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg means lightning war, comes from the German word Blitz, which means lightning, and Krieg, which means war. It's a tactic that uses fast mobile warfare with tanks and planes to overwhelm the enemy and surround them before they're able to react. April of 1940, Germany invades and captures Denmark and Norway. Now, with the East and North secure, Hitler turns towards France. He wants revenge for World War I. Now, France had built a massive line of fortifications along their border with Germany called the Maginot Line. Behind it, they believed they were safe from a German invasion. As you can see here on the map between Germany and France, the Maginot Line goes right along the border, but doesn't continue up along the border between Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. The Maginot Line had taken decades to build. It was heavily fortified, large gun emplacement, machine guns, anti-tank pits. They even had tunnels underground with small trains that could travel miles underneath, moving troops around. They had hospitals. They had large cafeterias, bunkers where they could keep people. It was heavily fortified, and the Germans knew it'd be extremely difficult to break through this line. So in the end, they didn't. Germany will invade through Belgium into France to avoid the Maginot Line. Now this occurs on May 10th, 1940, with the German invasions of Belgium, Netherlands, and France. Using Blitzkrieg tactics, they move quickly. Tanks quickly moved across the French countryside. The British and French armies are surrounded and trapped. Italy joins the war. About a couple weeks into the war, they declare war on Britain and France. On June 14th, the Germans enter Paris. France surrenders in only 6 weeks. Here we see the German army marching down the Champs-Élysées through the Arc de Triomphe. This was a famous photo of Parisians watching the German army march through Paris. Ironically, it took the German army in World War II 6 weeks to capture France, when the Imperial German army in World War I wasn't able to do it in almost 4 years. Now, the French government will set up a new collaborationist government in South France called Vichy France. They will agree to do whatever Germany tells them to do, and they'll be led by an 84-year-old French hero and general of the First World War, Marshal Pétain. It's very embarrassing to France, and many considered Pétain and the others, members of the Vichy government, traitors to France. Now, other French soldiers escaped to Britain with General Charles de Gaulle and create the Free French Army that will continue to fight the Germans. De Gaulle would go on to become a hero of France, and after the war will be elected its president. Now, the British Army was trapped in Dunkirk on the English Channel. The Royal Navy and civilian ships evacuates the British soldiers back to Britain. This was called the Miracle at Dunkirk. Hitler ordered his tanks to stop so the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, could bomb and destroy the Allies on the beaches. In just 9 days, 338,000 Allied soldiers, including 140,000 French, Polish, Belgian, and Dutch soldiers, escaped to England. The Dunkirk is kind of like a seaside heights resort, so there's not many piers that go out into the water, so the men basically had to go out into the water or climb across small lifeboats to get into the ships, sometimes just wading out and climbing into small sailboats that came over to rescue them. Britain is now alone. But they have a new leader, Winston Churchill. He was a defiant leader who would rally the British people throughout the war. The Battle of Britain. Hitler next wants to invade Britain, but since it's an island, it would need to destroy the British Air Force, known as the RAF or Royal Air Force, first. So in June of 1940, the start of the air war over Great Britain, which becomes known as the Battle of Britain. In June 10th of 1940, the start of the air war, the Battle of Britain, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, bombed Britain almost daily to destroy the RAF and Britain's will to fight back. Germany bombs London. This was called the Blitz. It went over for 6 months and killed 43,000 civilians. There was one period where London was bombed every night over a 2-month period but one. Britain had barbed wire stretched all around the cities and countryside because they were expecting a German invasion. Civilian watchers would stand up on rooftops constantly searching for German planes over London. You could see the famous St. Paul's Cathedral in the background. They put these barrage balloons up over around London. This ones are over over Buckingham Palace where the King and Queen live. The idea is that when the bombs are dropped, they would hit the balloons and explode and save whatever's underneath on the ground. The German planes would fly over in waves. They came at night. The searchlights would go on looking for them. The anti-aircraft fire trying to shoot them. The people would head off to air raid shelters. Mostly these were the subway, known in London as the Underground. People would sleep on the platforms, and if there was a lot of people, they actually just got down in the tracks. Think of this the next time you're in the PATH trains and you look down at the tracks, people sleeping down there. The bombing would continue. This was the famous picture of St. Paul's Cathedral surrounded by smoke. It was a symbol of London, and somehow it was never destroyed. It was hit a few times by bombs, but it was never destroyed. At night, the firemen were out fighting the fire. It was a very dangerous job for the firemen because the bombs continue to fall. You can see here a lot of buildings on fire and collapsing. In the end, the British Royal Air Force prevails over the German Luftwaffe, and the air war is a failure for Germany. The invasion of Britain is called off. But there was a lot of devastation to London and other cities. Many people had to be rescued from their collapsed buildings. Here we see a large crater that actually swallows up one of London's famous double-decker buses. Winston Churchill and his wife Clementine would visit bombed-out areas and to inspire the people. Here we see the King and Queen of England, King George VI and his wife Elizabeth. They're the parents of the current Queen Elizabeth II. They also would visit bombed-out areas to inspire the people. The last thing we're going to cover is Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR. Germany's code name for the invasion was Operation Barbarossa. Hitler's main goal had always been the conquest of the Soviet Union, his hatred of communism, and his desire to destroy it forever. So on June 22, 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. German tanks rolled across the border. Russia is a fairly flat country, so the German tanks were able to move very quickly. German Stuka dive bombers would destroy Russian planes on the ground, Russian defensive positions, Russian tanks, causing a lot of confusion and devastation, making it easier for the German Blitzkrieg to move swiftly into the Soviet Union. Here we see German soldiers, one throwing a hand grenade as they fight in the Soviet Union. The German attack is over a 1,000-mile front. Now, the Soviet soldiers fight hard, but they're cut off through the Blitzkrieg tactics of the Germans and forced to surrender. Germany captures a lot of territory. They drive deep into the Soviet Union, and they're outside the major cities of Moscow, the capital, and Leningrad by the fall of 1941. Unfortunately for the Germans, winter was coming. They were stopped ultimately by the fierce fighting of the Soviet army and the Russian winter. Heavy snows, temperatures dropping to 60 degrees below zero, makes it a nightmare for the German soldiers who only have summer uniforms because they expected to capture the Soviet Union in 5 months. So they never bothered giving them anything heavier than light jackets. We can see from these German soldiers here, I like the one on the left there where you can actually see icicles forming on their eyebrows. It was cold. By the end of 1941, Germany had won a number of victories and conquered many countries. However, the Allies were starting to get larger and stronger. All right, this concludes our section on World War II Begins. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.